Longtime lurker, first-time poster. I am at a complete loss regarding my former boyfriend's mother and her sudden demand for access to my son. I'm a single mom to my amazing 4-year-old son, Miguel. I work as a pediatric nurse on the night shift. Not ideal hours, but the pay differential helps us survive. I've been raising Miguel completely on my own since before he was born, and we've built a good life together despite some pretty significant challenges. Miguel's father, Jake, was a medical student when we met. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Naive, I know. What I didn't realize was that Jake had already started down a path of addiction that would eventually consume him. By the time I was 7 months pregnant, Jake had become increasingly erratic and violent. He disappeared entirely right before Miguel was born, but not before threatening me and creating nearly $45,000 of debt in my name through fraud, something I'm still paying off every month, which is why we live in a tiny apartment even though I have a decent job. Over the past 4 years, Jake has periodically surfaced only to make frightening threats about taking what's his and finding us. I've had to move twice, and I'm extremely private about our whereabouts and routines. I don't post pictures of Miguel online, and only a few trusted people know where we live. It might sound paranoid, but when someone has looked at you and promised to hunt you down, you take that seriously. Trust me on this one. Yesterday, I received a call from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. I get so many spam calls these days. It was Claudia. We've had minimal contact since my pregnancy, when she suggested I was trying to trap her son, despite the fact that he was the one who insisted we didn't need birth control. Red flag city, I know. Claudia's voice sounded strained as she told me that Jake had been arrested for attempted manslaughter after a drug deal went wrong and someone ended up critically injured. She said he's facing at least 10 years if convicted. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I need to be honest. I felt immediately relieved, and before I could stop myself, I let out a small laugh. Not because someone was hurt, that's terrible, but because for the first time in years, I felt like maybe Miguel and I could finally be safe. The line went silent. Then Claudia demanded to know if I thought her son potentially going to prison for a decade was funny. I tried to explain that it wasn't about humor, but about the constant fear I've been living with, possibly coming to an end. She cut me off mid-sentence. Rude, but not surprising. Her voice rose as she accused me of never understanding Jake's struggles, and then dropped the real reason for her call. My grandson deserves to know his father and his paternal family. Something inside me just snapped when she mentioned Miguel. Jake has never shown any interest in being a father beyond using Miguel as a tool for manipulation and threats. He's never sent a birthday card, paid $1 in child support, or even asked to see a picture. Her sudden concern felt insincere at best and threatening at worst. When I pointed this out, Claudia revealed her actual plan. I'm filing for grandparent visitation rights. You can't keep my grandson from me, especially now when our family is going through this tragedy. I ended the call when I heard Miguel waking up from his nap. I made him a snack, apple slices with peanut butter, his favorite. While watching him munch away, I wondered if feeling relieved about Jake's imprisonment made me a terrible person, despite everything he's put us through. That night, after I got Miguel to bed, I called my sister Lena, who's been my rock through everything. I expected her to brush off Claudia's threat, but instead, she suggested that Claudia might actually have legal standing for visitation in our state. That's when the panic really set in. During my night shift at the hospital, I spent every quiet moment researching grandparent rights while monitoring my patients. Probably not my proudest multitasking moment, but I was desperate. The more I read, the more the security I've carefully built for Miguel and myself seemed to be cracking. The thing that keeps replaying in my mind is how calculated this feels. Claudia has shown zero interest in Miguel for 4 years. Zero. She didn't send gifts for his birth. No Christmas cards, nothing for birthdays, not even a text asking how he was doing. Now suddenly, she's his concerned grandmother with rights. The timing with Jake's arrest can't be coincidental. What terrifies me most is what might happen if Claudia gets visitation. She has money and resources that I don't. She could potentially facilitate contact between Jake and Miguel, either now through prison visits or later when he's released. The thought of Miguel being exposed to Jake's manipulation and volatility makes me ill. I've worked so hard to create a stable, loving environment for my son, and the idea that the courts could force me to disrupt that is devastating. I spent my entire shift tonight going over worst-case scenarios in my head. What if the court rules in her favor? What if Jake gets involved from prison? What if Claudia tries to paint me as the vindictive ex keeping a child from his loving family? The irony of that last one is almost too much. The reality is that I'm a nurse working night shifts to support my son while paying off debt that Jake fraudulently created. Meanwhile, Claudia lives in a gated community and has connections with people who have influence in our town. Final edit before I go to bed. I just checked my email and found a message from a lawyer Claudia has already retained. They're requesting that I agree to a meeting to discuss options for integrating Miguel into his paternal family with minimal disruption. The speed at which she's moving is terrifying me. I feel like I'm being punished for finally feeling a moment of relief after years of looking over my shoulder. I've never blocked Jake from Miguel's life. He made the choice to disappear. I've never kept Miguel from Claudia. She chose not to be involved until now. But somehow, I'm the one who feels like I'm about to be put on trial as a mother. I've tried talking to people close to me, but they're all taking sides about whether family connections are more important than my concerns, and it's making everything worse. Some of my family members even suggested I should let bygones be bygones, since Jake is in custody now, as if years of threats can just be forgotten. Thanks for reading this far if you did. I'm completely overwhelmed and could use any advice from anyone who's dealt with grandparent rights cases or similar situations. Now for the first update. First of all, thank you all so much for the overwhelming support on my original post. Seriously, I'm blown away. I've been reading through all your comments and messages during my breaks at work, and I can't express how much your advice and validation has helped me these past few weeks. It's been 3 weeks since Claudia's call, and things have just gotten more complicated, because of course they have. I spent the first week after posting just spiraling with anxiety, reading your comments, and trying to figure out my next move. So many of you suggested getting a lawyer ASAP, and you were absolutely right. I managed to find a family law attorney who offered a reduced consultation fee. Shout out to the Redditor who suggested checking with the Nurses Union for legal resources. That actually helped. The consultation was sobering. The attorney confirmed what many of you said in the comments. Grandparents can petition for visitation rights in my state. She wasn't alarmist about it, but she didn't sugarcoat things either. Courts generally favor parental decisions, but given that Jake never formally terminated his parental rights, there's a legal pathway for Claudia. The attorney advised me to document everything, every call, text, email, or interaction with either Claudia or Jake. She also warned me that these cases can get lengthy and expensive, which is just fantastic news for my already stretched budget, still paying off that $45 debt Jake left me with. Hooray! I started a dedicated notebook where I'm keeping a detailed log of everything, plus backing it up digitally. My night shift supervisor has been surprisingly understanding about the whole situation. When I explained what was happening, she's given me some flexibility with scheduling for legal consultations. The downside is she also warned me that the hospital is going through some restructuring soon, and this level of accommodation probably won't last. Just what I needed. More stress about my job security on top of everything else. I tried explaining the situation to my parents last weekend when they came over for dinner. That went about as well as expected. Read, not great. They're very traditionally minded Mexican Americans who believe family connections should be maintained no matter what. My mom kept saying things like, the boy needs to know his father's family and maybe Jake has changed. They just don't understand the level of fear I've lived with for years. My dad actually suggested I should forgive and forget since Jake is in prison. I love them, but they're not getting it. Many of you with traditional parents predicted this exact reaction. Yesterday morning, after dropping Miguel at preschool, I came home to find a thick envelope in my mailbox with Claudia's return address. Inside were legal papers, the formal petition for grandparent visitation. She actually did it, and she moved fast. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour while reading through everything. The claims she's making are unbelievable. According to her petition, I have deliberately alienated Miguel from his paternal family and denied reasonable requests for contact. What reasonable requests? She has never shown interest in Miguel before now. To those who questioned this in my original post, yes, I'm 100% certain she made no attempts to contact us. The most manipulative part was the photos she included of Jake, all carefully selected from before his addiction took hold. Him in his white medical coat, smiling, looking respectable and accomplished. Nothing showing who he actually became or how he behaved. As I was still processing all this, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was the prison's automated system notifying me of a collect call from Jake. In nearly 5 years, he's never once tried to call me from wherever he's been. I almost didn't accept, but something told me I needed to know what he wanted. Plus, as many of you pointed out, documenting everything is important now. His voice sounded different, clearer and more coherent than I remembered. He started by saying he's been getting clean in prison and has had time to reflect on his life choices. He actually expressed regret for how he treated me and asked about Miguel. The whole time he was speaking, I just sat there stunned, unable to form words. When I didn't immediately warm up to this apparent change of heart, his tone shifted. It was subtle, but I recognized it immediately, that slight edge entering his voice. He mentioned that his mother told him about the difficulties I was creating regarding visitation. Then came the suggestion that cooperating would make things easier for everyone. Classic Jake, with threats disguised as reasonable-sounding language. I found my voice then and directly asked him about the threats he's made over the years, the ones that forced me to move twice and live in constant fear. He dismissed them completely, calling them moments of weakness during addiction, as if they were nothing. I had spent years looking over my shoulder, checking locks twice and screening unknown calls. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. It was disturbing how easily he shifted between seeming remorse and manipulation. It reminded me of the early warning signs I missed in our relationship, when his charm would flip to control in seconds. I called my attorney right away to report the unexpected contact. She advised me to document everything but avoid direct confrontation. According to her, the court might view cooperation positively, even though I have valid safety concerns. The system apparently values co-parenting relationships, even in situations like mine. Several of you with experience in family court warned me about this, and you were right. Last night at work was rough. I couldn't focus properly and kept making small mistakes. Nothing dangerous for patients, don't worry. I keep wondering if my fear of Jake is justified now that he's incarcerated. Am I allowing past trauma to affect my judgment about Miguel's right to know his family? Or is my instinct to protect my son at all costs the right call? For those asking about Miguel, he's doing okay. He doesn't know anything about what's happening, and I'm trying to keep it that way for as long as possible. He's still his happy, dinosaur-obsessed self, though he did ask why I looked sad the other day. Kids notice everything. To answer some frequent questions from my original post, 1. No, Jake is not on Miguel's birth certificate. He disappeared before I could add him. 2. Yes, I've kept all the threatening texts and voicemails from over the years. 3. No, I don't have a restraining order because he would disappear for months between incidents, making it difficult to maintain one. 4. Yes, I've thought about moving again, but my job and Miguel's preschool are here, plus moving costs money. I don't have. Final edit before I go to bed. I just checked my email and found a message from my sister Lena. She's been doing some digging and discovered that Claudia recently joined a grandparents' rights Facebook group where she's been getting advice on how to build her case. Apparently, she's been portraying herself as a victim who's been cruelly separated from her beloved grandson. The lies never stop, and I'm terrified of how believable she might seem to a judge who doesn't know the whole story. I'll keep you all updated as things progress with this nightmare situation. Thank you again for all your support and practical advice. It honestly feels like you all care more about Miguel's well-being than his own father and grandmother do. Now for the second update. Update 2. A lot of you have been flooding my inbox asking for an update on this nightmare situation with Claudia and Jake. So here's where things stand now. First, thank you all for the incredible support on my previous posts. Seriously, your advice has been so helpful in this situation. It's been 2 months since I last updated, and things have somehow managed to get even worse, because of course they have. Claudia has been playing this frustrating game where she schedules mediation sessions, makes me take time off work to attend them, and then cancels at the last minute for some emergency. My attorney says this is a classic tactic to drain my already limited resources, and it's definitely working. I've had to pay for childcare and take unpaid time off work for 3 separate sessions that never happened. Thanks, Claudia. My bank account is seriously hurting from all the legal fees. I've been picking up extra shifts at the hospital whenever I can, but working more night shifts is taking a toll. I rely heavily on coffee and dealing with anxiety at this point. The hospital restructuring I mentioned in my last post is happening, and my supervisor has been less flexible about my schedule now that it's becoming a pattern. Can't really blame her. The pediatric unit needs reliable staffing. The worst part happened last week. I was picking up Miguel from preschool when I spotted Claudia in the parking lot trying to give him presents. I've never actually met her in person before. Jake and I dated for almost 2 years, but he always made excuses about why we couldn't visit his family. I rushed over and got between them just as she was handing Miguel a wrapped package. I grabbed Miguel's hand and hurried him to the car while she called out, "I just wanted to meet my grandson," loud enough for other parents to hear. Great. Now I look like the unreasonable one to all the preschool parents. Miguel spent the whole drive home asking questions about the present lady and why we left so quickly. How do you explain this situation to a 4-year-old? I tried to keep it simple and age-appropriate, but he's been asking about her since then. I'm upset that he's being dragged into this mess that he has nothing to do with. Jake has been calling weekly from prison. I accept the calls because my attorney advised documenting everything. The transformation in his tone over these weeks has been something to witness. The first few calls were all apologies and "I've changed" talk. Now he's getting more entitled with each conversation. Last week, he actually said, "You owe me for all these years you've kept my son from me. I owe him. The man who left me pregnant, stole my identity, racked up $45 in debt in my name, and threatened me so badly I had to move twice. But sure, I'm the one who owes something here." Yesterday was the first preliminary hearing about Claudia's visitation petition. I was nervous, but prepared. My attorney and I had organized all the documentation of Jake's threatening behavior over the years. The texts, voicemails, everything. We were sitting on a bench outside the courtroom reviewing our strategy when Claudia walked in with her attorney. Let me tell you about this lawyer. He had a custom suit, a leather briefcase, and walked confidently. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there in my best Target blazer that I bought on clearance 3 years ago and eating a granola bar I grabbed from the nurse's station before leaving work. The most disturbing part was overhearing Claudia loudly telling her attorney about her recent prison visit with Jake. She made sure to position herself close enough that I would hear her saying how he's completely transformed and that the authorities are considering him for an early bail hearing due to his exemplary behavior. I was shocked. Early bail. Those 2 words overwhelmed me. The thought of Jake potentially being released, I immediately texted my attorney, who looked as surprised as I felt. This was the first we'd heard about any possibility of early bail. When we got inside the courtroom, Claudia's attorney presented this picture of a devoted grandmother cruelly separated from her grandson. They showed carefully edited texts and emails, conveniently omitting anything that would make Jake look bad. When my attorney presented evidence of Jake's threats, her lawyer suggested I was making false allegations to extort financial support from their family. The accusation is frustrating when I've been quietly paying off Jake's debt for years without asking them for money. The judge seemed skeptical of both sides, which is probably fair from an outside perspective. She ordered a home study to evaluate Miguel's living situation and asked for character references regarding Claudia's suitability for visitation. Not ideal, but definitely could have gone worse, according to my attorney. After the hearing, Claudia approached me in the hallway. She waited until nobody was within earshot, then leaned in close and said, "Jake knows where your sister lives. He has friends outside who keep him informed. It would be better for everyone if you were reasonable about this." I was shocked. I immediately told my attorney about the threat, but she explained that without witnesses, it becomes a he said, she said situation that might not help our case. Turns out, criminals don't typically make their threats in front of reliable witnesses. I called Lena from the car to warn her. She's taking it seriously and installing a security system this weekend. I have to warn my sister about potential danger from my son's father, and it feels completely wrong. That evening, I received an email that might change everything. It was from Dr. Harris, an attending physician I used to work with at the hospital where Jake was a medical student. He wrote that he'd heard about my situation through mutual colleagues and had concerning information about Jake's past behavior there. We're meeting tomorrow morning before my shift. I'm feeling conflicted about actively seeking out negative information about Jake. On one hand, I need to protect Miguel at all costs. On the other hand, there's this voice wondering if I'm doing the right thing by working so hard to keep him separated from his paternal family. Though that voice gets a lot quieter whenever I remember Claudia's threats and Jake's history. My attorney says judges typically favor some form of family connection unless there's clear evidence of danger. But how do I prove danger from someone who's careful about when and how he threatens? Jake was always smart about leaving no evidence during our relationship. Verbal threats in private, gaslighting me when I confronted him, making everything look like my overreaction to others. For those asking in comments about restraining orders, yes, I'm working on getting one reinstated, but it's complicated when the person is already incarcerated. And no, I can't just move away again. Miguel has his preschool here, I have my job, and most importantly, moving costs money I definitely don't have right now. Final edit before I go to bed. Just got off a quick call with my attorney, who said the home study evaluator could show up unannounced anytime in the next 2 weeks. So now I'm cleaning my apartment at 2 a.m. after a 12-hour shift to ensure Miguel's living conditions are acceptable. The system seems unfair to people who don't have money and connections, and I'm exhausted. This situation with Claudia and Jake keeps getting more complicated and honestly scarier by the day. I'll update again after meeting with Dr. Harris and finding out what he knows about Jake's past. Now for the final update. Final update on the Jake-Claudia custody nightmare. Huge thanks to everyone who's been following and for all the support you've given me through this situation. It's been just over 2 weeks since my last update, and my life has completely flipped upside down, again. That meeting with Dr. Harris turned out to be a turning point I never expected. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital before my shift started. I was very nervous, running on about 3 hours of sleep and my 4th coffee of the day. Dr. Harris recognized me immediately, despite not having worked together for nearly 5 years, which honestly surprised me. The moment we sat down, I could tell he was uncomfortable. He kept glancing around to ensure nobody could overhear us. Not a great sign. After some awkward small talk, he finally got to the point. Turns out Jake wasn't dismissed from medical school just for academic issues, like he'd always claimed. The truth was way worse. Harris explained that there had been serious concerns about patient medication discrepancies whenever Jake was on rotation. Nothing they could definitively prove, but enough of a pattern that they started monitoring him closely. Then came the real bombshell. Jake had displayed volatile and concerning behavior toward female staff, particularly nurses. One incident involved him cornering a young nurse in a supply closet and making threatening comments when she rejected his advances. I felt sick listening to this, but also validated in a way. All those times I thought I was crazy for being scared of him, and turns out my instincts were spot on. Dr. Harris said the hospital administration had covered everything up to avoid scandal. He looked regretful when he admitted he should have spoken up sooner, but he was a newer attending then and worried about his position. The most important part, he brought documentation, actual written reports that had been filed away rather than pursued. He said he couldn't stand by anymore, knowing a child's safety might be at stake. I almost cried right there in the coffee shop. I immediately called my attorney and forwarded everything. She was cautiously optimistic, but warned me that sealed medical records can be tricky to introduce in family court, typical legal roadblock. Still, it was the first real evidence backing up what I'd been saying about Jake all along. 3 days before our next scheduled court date, my attorney called with news that was very alarming. Jake had been granted a bail hearing based on new mitigating evidence and his mother's willingness to post bond. Apparently, Claudia had offered to put up a substantial amount of money and take full responsibility for monitoring him, which is difficult given his history of violence and substance abuse. I didn't sleep at all that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what would happen if Jake got out. I kept picturing him showing up at Miguel's preschool or my apartment. By morning, I was determined. Miguel's safety had to come before everything else, including any potential backlash I might face for what I was about to do. The morning of Jake's bail hearing arrived, and I was very upset, though I'd gotten pretty good at hiding it by this point. I dressed in my most professional outfit, Not easy when your wardrobe consists mostly of scrubs and mom clothes, and headed to the courthouse with Dr. Harris's documentation. My attorney met me outside, looking much more confident than I felt. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The first thing I noticed was Claudia sitting in the front row, wearing a designer suit and pearl earrings. She looked completely confident, as if this was just a formality before taking her son home. Then they brought Jake in, and I felt anxious. He wasn't wearing prison clothes. He was in a tailored suit that made him look respectable and trustworthy, the opposite of who he actually is. When Jake spotted me, I saw it. That cold, controlled anger I'd come to fear during our relationship. It flashed across his face for just a second before he composed himself back into the picture of reformed contrition, an expression I'm sure he'd been practicing in the mirror. I gripped my folder of documents tighter and tried to calm down. Jake's attorney presented him as this former promising medical student who had simply fallen on hard times but was now committed to rehabilitation. He emphasized Claudia's support and how she could provide a stable environment. The whole time I kept thinking about those hospital reports in my folder and how they told a completely different story. What really threw me was the prosecutor's attitude. He seemed subdued, only mentioning the seriousness of the charges without really pushing back against release. I started wondering if Claudia's influence extended to the district attorney's office too. When they called me to speak as a victim of Jake's prior harassment, I approached the podium, hands shaking but voice steady, as I presented the documentation from Dr. Harris, along with evidence of the debt Jake had fraudulently created in my name. Your Honor, what you're holding isn't just paperwork. It's evidence of a pattern of behavior that makes Jake dangerous, not just to me and my son, but to others as well. These hospital reports show that's when Jake's calm demeanor changed. His face became red as he stood up and shouted, "She's lying. She's been keeping my son from me." The bailiff immediately stepped closer to him, and his attorney tried to get him to sit down. The judge, disturbed by both the new evidence and Jake's outburst, called a brief recess to review the documents. During the break, I stepped into the hallway to compose myself. That's when Claudia cornered me. She was aggressive as she said, "You've ruined everything. You'll regret this." Then she added that regardless of what happened today, she would continue pursuing visitation and making life difficult until I agreed to her terms. I didn't respond. Thank you to everyone who advised me not to engage directly. You were right. Just turned and walked away, which seemed to make her even angrier. My attorney, who witnessed the whole thing, documented it immediately. When court resumed, the judge looked completely different. His previously neutral expression had hardened into something serious. He denied bail based on the new evidence, and to my shock, ordered an investigation into potential witness tampering suggested by Dr. Testified. Harris's statement about institutional pressure to downplay Jake's past behavior. As they led Jake away, he locked eyes with me and said loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, "This isn't over." The judge immediately noted this with visible concern and ordered additional security measures. My attorney and I sat down on a bench outside the courtroom afterward. She gave me mixed news. The judge had suspended the grandparent visitation case pending the outcome of Jake's criminal trial. Huge relief. But I was still facing significant legal expenses and potential retaliation from Claudia's connections. Not so great. The last 2 weeks have been surprisingly quiet. Jake is back in prison with no bail, and Claudia seems to have gone underground for now, though my attorney warns this is probably just temporary. I've installed a security system at home with cameras, thanks to everyone who suggested this, and to my sister who helped pay for it. My supervisor at the hospital has been incredibly understanding since learning the full story and has adjusted my schedule to give me more day shifts. Turns out Dr. Harris put in a good word for me with management. Sometimes the system actually works. Miguel has been asking fewer questions about the present lady, which is a relief. I've started therapy again, should have never stopped, honestly, and am working through the complicated feelings of finally being believed after years of Jake making me seem like the unstable one to everyone around us. The financial situation is still tough, but several nurses from my unit started a meal train for us, which has been a literal lifesaver some weeks. Miguel and I have even been able to have a few normal weekends without court appearances or legal prep hanging over us. Edit. Several people have asked if I'm planning to pursue charges against the hospital, for covering up Jake's behavior. My attorney advises against it for now since we need their cooperation for Jake's trial. The administrator, who was primarily responsible for burying the reports, has apparently taken early retirement, according to Dr. Harris. Reed quietly pushed out. As this difficult chapter with Jake and Claudia hopefully comes to a close, I'm cautiously looking toward a future where my son and I can live without constantly worrying. Thank you all for being there when I needed support and advice the most. This community truly helped me find my voice when I needed it.